Halo Top is remembered as the ice cream that broke the internet, a low-calorie miracle that briefly became the best-selling pint in America, outselling Ben and Jerry's and Häagen-Dazs combined. But its true story is one of the most spectacular rise and fall tragedies in modern food history. Founded in 2011 by Justin Wolverton, a lawyer who hated his job and had a sugar addiction, the brand was built on a single, seductive lie that you can eat an entire pint of ice cream without consequence. For 5 years, it was a niche failure, mocked for its chalky texture. Then in 2016, a single viral article triggered a mania that propelled the company from $5 million to $347 million in revenue in just 18 months. But the hype was a trap. The guilt-free promise collapsed under the weight of consumer backlash against its artificial ingredients and inconsistent quality. By 2019, sales had plummeted by nearly 70%, forcing the founders to sell their unicorn to the boring, stable hands of Wells Enterprises just to survive. As of 2025, Halo Top exists not as a revolutionary disruptor, but as a cautionary tale about the difference between building a trend and building a business, the origin of a $20 experiment. If you looked at Justin Wolverton in 2011, you would see a man who had made it. He was a corporate lawyer in Los Angeles, billing high hours and living a life of structured, enviable success. But the reality was far less glamorous. Wolverton was a man at war with himself, grinding through legal briefs he hated by day and battling a debilitating sugar addiction by night. He was a hypoglycemia sufferer, a man whose blood sugar would crash violently if he ate the wrong thing. He was trapped in a body that craved sugar but couldn't handle it. This created a cycle of deprivation and binging. He would eat clean all day, chicken, broccoli, almonds. And then, late at night, alone in his apartment, the craving would hit. He didn't just want a cookie, he wanted a pint of ice cream. But in 2011, the ice cream aisle was a binary world. You had Ben and Jerry's and Häagen-Dazs on one side, glorious, creamy, full-fat indulgences that packed 1,000 calories and 100 grams of sugar into a pint. On the other side, you had the diet options. Sad, icy, flavorless blocks of frozen skim milk that tasted like punishment. There was no middle ground. There was no way to eat an entire pint without destroying your body. Wolverton decided to solve this problem not as a businessman, but as a desperate addict looking for a fix. He bought a $20 Cuisinart ice cream maker on Amazon and turned his small kitchen into a laboratory. He had no culinary training. He had no food science degree. He was just a lawyer with a credit card and a sweet tooth. He started experimenting with ingredients that, at the time, were relegated to the dusty shelves of health food stores. He messed around with Greek yogurt. He tried almond milk. And then he discovered the magic dust, stevia, a natural plant-based sweetener with 0 calories, and erythritol, a sugar alcohol that passed through the body undigested. The early experiments were disasters. The chemistry of ice cream is unforgiving. Sugar isn't just for sweetness. It controls the freezing point. It's what keeps the ice cream soft. When Wolverton removed the sugar, his concoctions froze into rock-hard bricks of ice. He ruined batch after batch. His kitchen was covered in white powder. But he kept tweaking. He realized he needed a binder, something to mimic the mouthfeel of fat. He started adding prebiotic fiber. He added milk protein concentrate. It was a Frankenstein approach to food, stitching together isolated chemical components to simulate the experience of eating cream. Finally, after months of failures, he produced a batch that was edible. It wasn't great. It had a strange chemical aftertaste. The texture was gritty, but it was sweet, it was cold, and the entire pint had only 240 calories. He realized he had cracked the code. He could eat the whole thing and not feel sick. He believed with the naive arrogance of the amateur that he had invented the future. In 2012, Wolverton quit his law job. It was a terrifying leap. He took his life savings, about $50,000, and incorporated Eden Creamery. He found a small co-packer who agreed to produce a run of his strange, high-protein sludge. He didn't have a distributor, so he became one. He loaded the pints into the back of his car and drove around Los Angeles, begging grocery store managers to let him stock their shelves. He was a one-man army, fighting for freezer space against the titans of Unilever and Nestlé. He managed to get into a few Whole Foods and Erewhon markets, mostly because the store managers pitied the sweaty guy in the suit. But the market's reaction was brutal. The idealistic rise hit a wall of reality. The product wasn't very good. The early version of Halo Top suffered from a fatal flaw. Because it lacked sugar and fat, it froze harder than concrete. Customers would buy a pint, take it home, and bend their spoons trying to scoop it. If they managed to get a bite, the texture was described as chalky or dry. The stevia left a bitter, metallic aftertaste. It was a health food, and it tasted like one. Sales were anemic. The revenue in that first year was barely enough to keep the lights on. Wolverton was burning through his savings. He was alone, driving a delivery van, watching his dream melt in the California heat. He had built a product that solved his own problem, but he hadn't figured out how to make anyone else care. It was in this moment of near collapse in 2013 that the second character of our tragedy entered the stage. Justin Wolverton realized he couldn't do this alone. He was an introvert, a tinkerer, a man who was happier in a kitchen with a beaker of stevia than in a boardroom. He needed a shark. He found one in a recreational basketball league for lawyers. His name was Doug Boughton. Like Wolverton, Boughton was a refugee from the corporate legal world, a man who had stared into the abyss of billable hours and blinked. But unlike Wolverton, Boughton was not a dreamer. He was a grinder. He was intense, aggressive, and financially desperate. He had just gone through a breakup, he was saddled with massive law school debt, and he had zero income. When Wolverton showed him the diet ice cream, Boughton didn't taste the chalky texture or the weird aftertaste. He saw a math equation. He saw the macros, high protein, low sugar. He looked at the fitness industry, at the rise of CrossFit and the demonization of sugar, and he saw a weapon that was being aimed at the wrong target. Boughton joined the company not for a salary, there was no money for that, but for equity. He became the president and COO, but his real title was the Hustler. The partnership was forged in a crucible of humiliation. They had no marketing budget. They couldn't afford billboards. They couldn't afford slotting fees to get onto supermarket shelves. So they decided to win by sheer brute force. They divided the country. They engaged in what they called guerrilla distribution. They would fly to a city, rent the cheapest economy car available, and sleep in motels that cost $40 a night, sometimes sharing a room to save cash. They would spend their days stalking the dairy buyers of major supermarket chains. They would wait in lobbies for hours, hoping to catch a manager on their way to the bathroom just to hand them a spoon and a melting pint of vanilla bean. It was undignified, exhausting work. They were two men with Ivy League degrees, effectively working as door-to-door salesmen, maxing out their credit cards to pay for production runs. At one point, the company was so cash poor that they were reportedly weeks away from insolvency, playing a dangerous shell game with their co-packers and vendors, paying one bill late to pay another one on time, praying that the checks wouldn't bounce before the next grocery order came in. But during this dark night of the soul in 2013 and 2014, amidst the rejection and the debt, they made the two decisions that would eventually light the fuse on the rocket. First, they accepted the hard truth that the product was flawed. They couldn't just market their way out of the chalky taste. Wolverton went back to the lab. He realized that healthy wasn't enough. It had to be palatable. He reformulated the recipe. He increased the protein slightly, but more importantly, he tweaked the prebiotic fiber and the freezing process to make the ice cream softer, to temper the rock-hard freeze that had plagued the early batches. It still wasn't Ben & Jerry's. It would never be that creamy, but it was close enough to fool the brain of a sugar-starved dieter. The second decision was the master stroke. It was a design choice that would change the entire food industry. The original packaging of Halo Top was generic. It looked like a medicinal health food product, cluttered with words like natural and stevia. They realized that their biggest asset wasn't the flavor, nor the ingredients. It was the number. In a moment of clarity, they decided to redesign the pint. They hired a local designer and gave a radical instruction. Make the calorie count the logo. They stripped away the clutter and placed the number 240 in massive, bold font right in the center of the package. They wrapped the pint in a gold-rimmed lid, giving it a premium halo look. But the message was blunt, aggressive, and revolutionary. For decades, diet brands had sold servings. They whispered about 100 calories per scoop. Halo Top screamed, "Eat the whole thing." They were the first brand to explicitly market the binge. They acknowledged the dark reality of American eating habits, that nobody stops at one scoop, and they absolved the consumer of the sin. By 2015, the pieces were finally in place. The product was edible. The packaging was loud and distinct on the shelf. The distribution network was held together by duct tape and Doug Booten's sheer willpower. They had clawed their way to $5 million in revenue. It was a respectable survival. They were alive, but they were still a niche brand for gym rats and people on strict diets. They were invisible to the mainstream. They had built the engine, filled the tank, and put the key in the ignition. They were just waiting for someone to step on the gas. And in 2016, that foot would arrive in the form of a journalist named Shane Snow and a single article that would turn their little diet ice cream into a cultural supernova that would burn brighter and faster than anything the industry had ever seen. The 2,500% nightmare. The match that lit the fuse was struck in January 2016, and it came from the most unlikely of sources. It wasn't a Super Bowl ad, it wasn't a strategic partnership, and it wasn't a celebrity endorsement. It was a weird gonzo journalism article in GQ magazine, written by a journalist named Shane Snow. The headline was absurd, something that sounded like a prank or a dare. I ate nothing but Halo Top for 10 days. It was a stunt, a supersize me in reverse. Snow, intrigued by the massive 240 calories printed on the new packaging, decided to test the limits of the claim. He lived on a diet of 5 pints of ice cream a day. The result? He lost weight, he lost body fat, he didn't die. The article was funny, it was shocking, and it was the scientific permission that millions of Americans, terrified of sugar but desperate for comfort, had been waiting for. It went viral instantly. It was shared on Facebook walls, in gym group chats, on Reddit threads, and in the break rooms of offices across the country. It transformed Halo Top from a diet product into a miracle. Suddenly the dam broke. The years of grinding, of sleeping in cheap motels, of begging for shelf space, it all vanished in a tidal wave of demand that defied the laws of physics. The sales curve didn't just go up, it went vertical. In 2015, the company had scraped together $5 million in revenue. In 2016, fueled entirely by the internet frenzy, revenue exploded to $132 million. It was a 2,500% increase. It was the kind of growth that kills companies. Wolverton and Boughton were no longer managing a business. They were riding a tiger. They were still a tiny team working out of a co-working space, and suddenly they were receiving orders that were larger than their entire previous year's production. The supply chain collapsed. Grocery stores were wiped clean within hours of restocking. A black market for Halo Top emerged, with people driving across state lines to find pints, trading flavors online like contraband, and posting photos of their hauls on Instagram like trophy hunters. This scarcity, which would have destroyed a traditional brand, fueled the hype even further. In the bizarre economy of 2016, the empty shelf was the ultimate advertisement. It proved that the product was desirable. It turned grocery shopping into a treasure hunt. Finding a pint of birthday cake or peanut butter cup became a status update. The golden age of Halo Top had begun, but it was built on a foundation of chaos. Wolverton and Boughton were scrambling. They were contracting every co-packer they could find, from California to the Midwest, begging factories to stop making other brands and start churning out Halo Top. They were shipping product that hadn't fully set. They were running the company on adrenaline and caffeine, trying to capture the lightning in the bottle before it escaped. By 2017, the Halo Top effect had reached its zenith. The company, still technically a startup, achieved the unthinkable. In July 2017, the Nielsen data came in, and it sent a shockwave through the boardrooms of Unilever and Nestlé. Halo Top had become the best-selling pint of ice cream in the United States. They had outsold Ben & Jerry's. They had outsold Häagen-Dazs. They had taken a century of ice cream history, the rich, creamy, full-fat legacy of the dairy industry, and thrown it in the trash, replacing it with a pint of stevia-sweetened, low-calorie air. The big food giants were in a state of corporate shock. They had spent billions on marketing indulgence, and they were losing to two lawyers who were selling abstinence disguised as ice cream. For Justin Wolverton, the introvert who had just wanted to satisfy his own sugar cravings, this should have been paradise. He was the king of the aisle. He was the cover story of Inc. magazine. He was the genius who had disrupted an entire industry. But inside the company, the golden age was a nightmare of operational stress. They were scaling too fast. The pressure to produce meant that quality control was slipping. Some batches were creamy, others were icy rocks, some were filled to the top, others had air pockets. But the consumer, drunk on the hype, didn't seem to care. They were addicted to the idea of Halo Top. They were addicted to the guilt-free promise. The brand had tapped into the deepest anxiety of the modern eater, the fear of fat. Halo Top was not selling food. It was selling absolution. You could eat the whole pint, the ultimate act of gluttony, and face zero consequences. It was the perfect product for the Instagram age. It looked like a treat, but it acted like a salad. The world was eating it up, unaware that the miracle was about to curdle. But a brand built on a viral trend is a brand built on sand. And as 2017 turned into 2018, the tide began to go out. The fundamental problem with Halo Top was not its marketing, which was brilliant, nor its packaging, which was iconic. The problem was the physics of the ice cream itself. The magic trick of replacing sugar with erythritol and fat with fiber came with a sensory price tag that the consumer was only willing to pay while the novelty was fresh. Once the thrill of eating an entire pint for 240 calories wore off, The reality of the experience set in. People started to notice that if you didn't let the pint sit on the counter for 20 minutes to temper, it had the texture of a frozen brick. They started to notice the strange cooling sensation of the sugar alcohol on their tongues, a chemical aftertaste that lingered like a ghost. They started to notice that the birthday cake flavor didn't really taste like cake. It tasted like vanilla-scented air. The internet, which had built them up with meme-fueled joy, began to turn on them with meme-fueled cynicism. The narrative shifted. Halo Top was no longer the miracle treat. It was the ice cream of loneliness. It became the punchline for a specific kind of modern disordered eating, a sad solitary binge in a dark apartment, spooning low-calorie sludge into your mouth to fill a void without gaining weight. Articles began to appear in major publications questioning the health claims. Nutritionists pointed out that eating a pint of processed fiber and gums wasn't actually good for you. It was just less bad than sugar. The guilt-free halo began to tarnish. A class action lawsuit was filed, alleging that the company was underfilling its pints, a side effect of the chaotic, rushed production schedule that Wolverton and Boughton had been forced to adopt to meet the insane demand. The golden age was revealing itself to be a golden cage. The founders had created a monster that demanded constant growth, but the product itself had a fatal lack of retention. People bought it once to try the hype, but they didn't buy it twice because it simply didn't taste good enough to crave. And then the empire struck back. The big food giants, Unilever and Nestle, woke up from their shock. They realized that Halo Top had no proprietary technology. There was no secret patent on stevia or skim milk. Anyone could make a light ice cream. And unlike Halo Top, the giants had infinite R&D budgets, perfect supply chains, and better ingredients. In 2018, the freezer aisle became a war zone. Breyers launched Delights, a shameless clone of Halo Top, with the exact same calorie counts and protein claims, but with the distribution power of a multinational corporation. Ben & Jerry's launched Moophoria, a light ice cream that, crucially, still contained some sugar and fat, positioning itself as the tastier alternative to Halo Top's chemical profile. Other brands like Enlightened and Chili Cow flooded the market. The blue ocean that Wolverton had discovered was suddenly red with blood. The impact on Halo Top was catastrophic. The sales data from 2018 and 2019 tells a story of a precipitous collapse. The brand, which had been the #1 selling pint in America, plummeted. Revenue dropped by nearly 70% from its peak. The scarcity was gone. Now shelves were piled high with discounted pints that no one wanted. The black market evaporated. The company went from being a unicorn, valued at $2 billion in the press, to a distressed asset. Inside the company, the mood shifted from euphoria to exhaustion. Wolverton and Boughton, the two lawyers who had conquered the world, were burnt out. They had spent 7 years fighting, first for survival, then for growth, and now for relevance. They were managing a crashing business with a bloated valuation. The fun was gone. They realized they had built a fad, not a legacy. They needed an exit. They needed to sell the company before the ice cream melted completely. By the summer of 2019, the mood inside the Halo Top headquarters in Los Angeles had shifted from the manic energy of a frat party to the somber quiet of a hospice. The sales charts, which had once defied gravity, were now obeying it with a vengeance. The revenue, which had peaked at nearly $350 million, was in freefall, dropping by double digits every quarter. The hype cycle, the drug that the company had been addicted to, had run its course. The internet had moved on. The miracle of 2016 was now just another pint of ice cream sitting in a freezer, surrounded by cheaper, better-tasting clones from Ben & Jerry's and Breyers. Justin Wolverton and Doug Boughton, the two lawyers who had accidentally conquered the world, found themselves trapped in a classic founder's dilemma. They had built a brand that was too big to fail, but too broken to succeed on its own. They were burnt out. They were tired of the logistics nightmares, tired of the lawsuits, tired of the constant need to feed the social media beast. They realized with a cold clarity that they were not operators. They were creators. They had launched a rocket, but they didn't know how to fly it in orbit. They needed a lifeboat. They needed to sell. But selling a company that is in decline is a very different negotiation than selling a rocket ship. In 2017, reports circulated that they were looking for a buyer with a valuation of $2 billion. By 2019, that number was a fantasy. The big players, Unilever and Nestlé, were wary. They had already launched their own competitors. Why buy the original when they were already killing it? Wolverton and Boughton needed a buyer who was desperate for cool, someone who had the infrastructure to fix the quality issues, but lacked the cultural relevance to reach the millennial generation. They found their savior not in Silicon Valley or New York, but in Lamars, Iowa. The buyer was Wells Enterprises. To the average coastal hipster eating Halo Top, the name meant nothing. But in the industry, Wells was a giant. They were the family-owned company behind Blue Bunny, the quintessential uncool ice cream. Blue Bunny was the ice cream of the Midwest, of church picnics, of grandmothers. It was massive, efficient, and utterly boring. Wells Enterprises looked at Halo Top and saw the missing piece of their puzzle. They had the factories, the trucks, and the perfect supply chain, but they had zero traction with anyone under the age of 40. They needed Halo Top's brand halo to modernize their portfolio. Halo Top needed Wells's boring efficiency to stop the bleeding. It was a marriage of necessity, not passion. In September 2019, the deal was signed. The price was never officially disclosed, but industry whispers pegged it far below the $2 billion dream, likely closer to a few $100 million. For Wolverton and Boughton, it was a massive, life-changing payday, a triumphant exit from a gamble that should have left them bankrupt. But for the brand, it was the end of the era of magic. The independent, guerrilla, lawyers in a kitchen story was over. Halo Top was now the property of a 100-year-old dairy conglomerate from Iowa. The transition was immediate and unsentimental. The chaotic, outsourced production network that Wolverton had cobbled together, the source of the inconsistent textures and underfilled pints, was dismantled. Production was moved to Wells's massive, state-of-the-art facilities. The recipe was stabilized. The chalky texture was finally engineered out, replaced by the consistent, if slightly industrial smoothness of Big Food. The golden age of volatility was replaced by the silver age of stability. The black market ended. The scarcity ended. Halo Top became just another pint on the shelf, sitting politely next to the Blue Bunny. But as the dust settled on the sale, the new owners faced a daunting reality. They had bought the brand, but the hype was gone. Sales continued to slide, bottoming out below $100 million in 2020. The diet trend was shifting again, away from low-calorie and toward keto and plant-based. The brand was no longer the shiny new thing. It was a turnaround project. To survive the next decade, to earn back the money they had paid, Wells Enterprises couldn't just rely on the pint. They had to do what every maturing brand must do. They had to stop being a product and start being a platform. They had to take the Halo Top name and slap it on everything. They had to diversify, and they had to look beyond the borders of the United States to markets where the low-calorie revolution was just beginning. The hype trap had closed, but the corporate expansion was just beginning. How do you save a brand that lost 70% of its sales? The acquisition of Halo Top by Wells Enterprises in September 2019 marked the end of the Wild West era of the brand, but it signaled the beginning of something far more systematic and in many ways more ruthless, the industrialization of the guilt-free promise. When the executives at Wells took possession of the keys to the kingdom in Lamars, Iowa, they looked at the sales charts and saw a grim picture of the American market. The United States had reached peak diet ice cream. Everyone who was going to try Halo Top had already tried it. The novelty had worn off, the hype was dead, and the market was saturated with copycats. The American consumer had moved on. To earn back their investment, Wells knew they couldn't just squeeze more sales out of a bored American public. They needed fresh territory. They needed to find populations that were just as obsessed with body image, just as terrified of sugar, and just as desperate for a miracle cure as the Americans were in 2016. They decided to export the anxiety. This was the reason for the massive, aggressive international diversification strategy that defined the years 2019 to 2022. Wells Enterprises possessed something that Justin Wolverton never had: a global cold chain infrastructure. They didn't need to negotiate with individual store managers in London or Sydney. They could flip a switch. They targeted the Anglosphere, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Canada, markets that shared America's cultural obsession with fitness and thinness, but had lagged behind in the low-calorie food revolution. The strategy was to essentially replay the 2016 American viral moment, but this time engineered by a billion-dollar corporation rather than a gonzo journalist. They wanted to introduce Halo Top to the British and Australians not as a fading fad, but as a brand new revelation. However, the effectiveness of this global rollout faced a hurdle that money couldn't easily solve: regulation. The formula that Wolverton had concocted in his kitchen, the heavy use of erythritol, the specific blend of stevia, the milk protein concentrates, was legally compliant in the deregulation-friendly United States, but it was a chemical minefield in the European Union and Australia. These regions have far stricter food labeling laws and a deeper cultural suspicion of frankenfoods. In the UK, for instance, sugar taxes and strict rules about what can be called ice cream forced the R&D teams at Wells into a frantic period of reformulation. They had to re-engineer the product to meet local laws without changing the taste or, crucially, the calorie count. The number 240 or 320 on the front of the pint was the brand's soul. If they had to raise it to 400 to meet a formulation requirement, the brand would die. They spent millions in R&D to create mirror formulas, products that looked and tasted like American Halo Top, but were chemically distinct under the hood to satisfy a bureaucrat in Brussels or Canberra. Despite these hurdles, the launch in these new markets was a staggering success, proving the universality of the brand's psychological hook. In the United Kingdom, the launch was treated with the same fervor as the original U.S. explosion. British consumers starved for a low-sugar option in a market dominated by heavy, creamy dairy cleared the shelves of Tesco and Sainsbury's. The scarcity narrative returned, this time manufactured by the logistics of shipping containers rather than production failures. In Australia, the brand tapped into the massive beach body culture, positioning Halo Top not just as a winter comfort food, but as a summer essential. The effectiveness was measurable. International sales became the primary growth engine for the company between 2020 in 2022, offsetting the continued double-digit declines in the domestic U.S. market. Wells had successfully taken a dying American fad and reincarnated it as a booming global staple. But this geographic expansion revealed a deeper truth about the brand's new identity. Under Wells, Halo Top stopped being a startup and became a commodity. In these new markets, there was no Justin Wolverton story. There was no lawyer in a kitchen narrative. It was just a tub of ice cream that appeared in the freezer aisle one day, backed by massive trade spend and slotting fees. The soul of the underdog was replaced by the efficiency of the supply chain. The marketing shifted from quirky, dark, internet humor ads to polished, localized campaigns that emphasized lifestyle and balance. They weren't selling rebellion anymore. They were selling compliance with global beauty standards. The export of anxiety worked because the desire to be thin without suffering is not an American neurosis. It is a human one. Wells Enterprises proved that you can scale a diet brand globally if you have the logistics to put the pint in the hand of the customer the exact moment they feel the urge to binge. By 2022, the international division was stabilizing the company's bottom line, buying them the time and capital they needed to turn their attention back to the U.S., where a new, even more difficult battle was brewing, the war for the keto dieter. While the international division was busy exporting the low-calorie anxiety to London and Sydney, the domestic war in the United States had shifted ground beneath the company's feet. By 2020, the low-calorie trend that had birthed Halo Top was dying. The American dieter is fickle, and the pendulum of nutritional neurosis had swung violently from fear of calories to fear of carbs. The new king of the diet world was keto. This presented a terrifying existential threat to Wells Enterprises. The original Halo Top formula was built on skim milk and prebiotic fiber. It was high protein but low fat. It was chemically incompatible with the keto diet, which demanded high fat and almost zero carbs. The very thing that made Halo Top famous, its lightness, was now its liability. The gym rats and influencers who had built the brand in 2016 were now eating sticks of butter and avocados, and they were abandoning Halo Top for new, fat-heavy competitors like Rebel ice cream. This necessitated the second, and technically most difficult diversification of the Wells era: the product pivot. The leadership in Lamar's, Iowa, realized they could no longer be a one-trick pony selling a single formulation. They had to fragment the brand. They had to create a product for every specific type of dietary dysfunction in America. In 2020, they launched the Halo Top Keto series. This was not just a flavor extension. It was a complete chemical reinvention. The R&D team had to throw out the skim milk and bring in the heavy cream. They had to replace the cane sugar not just with stevia, but with erythritol and other sugar alcohols to get the net carbs down to near zero. The reason for this pivot was survival, but the effectiveness revealed a surprising and ironic twist. For years, the biggest complaint about Halo Top was its texture, the chalky, dry, or icy mouthfeel caused by the lack of fat. By pivoting to keto, which required fat, Wells accidentally fixed the product's biggest flaw. The keto series was creamier, smoother, and richer than the original. It tasted like real ice cream because chemically it was closer to it. This created a strange bifurcation in the brand identity. On one shelf, you had the original. On the next shelf, you had keto. The brand was no longer standing for a single philosophy. It was hedging its bets against the confusion of the American eater. Simultaneously, Wells executed a second product diversification designed to solve the binge problem. The original genius of Halo Top was the "Eat the Whole Pint" slogan. It gave permission to binge. But by 2021, the cultural conversation around wellness was shifting away from binging and toward portion control and snackification. The idea of sitting alone with a pint was starting to feel sad again. To counter this, Wells aggressively expanded into Halo Top Pops and fruit bars. They took the formula out of the pint and put it on a stick. This move was strategically brilliant for the bottom line. A pint of ice cream is a destination purchase. You have to plan to eat it. A bar on a stick is an impulse purchase. You grab it because it's hot outside or you want a quick hit of sugar. It moved Halo Top out of the sad dinner category and into the after-school snack category. It allowed the brand to enter convenience stores and gas stations, places where selling a spoon-required pint was impossible. The effectiveness of this snackification was the stabilization of U.S. revenue. While pint sales continued to soften as the novelty wore off, the sales of bars and pops grew, filling the gap. It transformed Halo Top from a specialty diet product into a ubiquitous frozen novelty brand, sitting right next to the popsicles and the drumsticks. However, this relentless diversification created a brand dilution risk. By 2023, the freezer aisle was a confusing mosaic of Halo Top products: original, keto, dairy-free, fruit sorbet, and yogurt pops. The simplicity of the original message, 240 calories, was lost in a sea of net carbs, plant-based, and real fruit. The consumer was confused. The brand had survived by becoming a shapeshifter, mirroring whatever diet trend was trending on TikTok that week. It was a profitable strategy, but it was a cynical one. It proved that the company no longer had a soul or a mission other than to be the mirror for America's dietary insecurities. If America wanted fat, they sold fat. If America wanted fruit, they sold fruit. The idealistic rise of Justin Wolverton's kitchen was gone. Halo Top was now just a mirror reflecting the chaotic, ever-changing desires of a hungry public. By 2022, Wells Enterprises had stabilized the bleeding in the freezer aisle through the brute force of product diversification. They had the keto line for the fat lovers, the fruit bars for the snackers, and the international distribution for the global dieters. But they faced a physical limitation that haunts every ice cream manufacturer: the freezer itself. The frozen food aisle is the most expensive real estate in the grocery store. Electricity costs money, space is finite. There is a hard ceiling on how much ice cream a single store can stock, and competitors were constantly fighting for every inch. To continue the growth trajectory demanded by their shareholders, Wells realized they needed to escape the cold chain entirely. They needed to take the Halo Top brand, which had become synonymous with sweetness without consequence, and apply it to categories that didn't melt. This birthed the licensing strategy, a move that transformed Halo Top from a manufacturer of dairy products into a purveyor of intellectual property. The logic was ruthless and brilliant. If consumers trusted Halo Top to make a healthy ice cream that tasted like birthday cake, surely they would trust them to make an actual birthday cake. In a landmark partnership, Wells signed a licensing deal with General Mills, one of the largest food conglomerates in the world. Suddenly, Halo Top wasn't just next to the Ben & Jerry's, it was next to the Betty Crocker. They launched Halo Top baking mixes, brownies, cookies, and cakes, along with light frostings. The reason for this pivot was purely financial efficiency. Manufacturing ice cream is capital intensive. It requires cows, milk, freezers, and trucks. Licensing is capital light. General Mills did the manufacturing, the shipping, and the stocking. Wells simply lent them the logo and the flavor profile, and in return, they collected a royalty check on every box sold. It It was virtually 100% profit margin revenue. It was free money, generated by the brand equity built during the hype years. The effectiveness of this move went beyond the balance sheet. It colonized the consumer's pantry. Ice cream is a nighttime treat, hidden away in the dark of the freezer. Baking mixes sit on the shelf, visible every time you open the cupboard door. It normalized the brand. It moved Halo Top from a guilty pleasure into a staple food. It allowed a mother to bake low-calorie brownies for her children, integrating the brand into the family dynamic in a way that a single pint of ice cream never could. The brand was no longer just a binge aid. It was a lifestyle ingredient. This strategy was quickly expanded into other aisles. They launched Halo Top yogurt and even explored confectionery partnerships. However, this aggressive licensing created a new layer of brand dilution. The original Halo Top was a specific magical thing, a pint of ice cream. Now, Halo Top was a flavor chemical. It was a label that could be slapped on anything to signify low sugar. The specific cult-like connection that Justin Wolverton had forged with his audience in 2016 was being stretched thin. The brand was becoming a utility, a signifier for a specific nutritional profile rather than a beloved product. But for Wells Enterprises, this was the point. They didn't buy Halo Top to maintain a cult. They bought it to build a machine. By 2024, the licensing division was a steady high-margin engine that insulated the company from the volatility of dairy prices. If the price of milk skyrocketed, the brownie mix sales would cushion the blow. The licensing machine had successfully turned a fad into a franchise, proving that in the modern food industry, the most valuable asset isn't the food itself, but the permission it gives the consumer to eat it. As we arrive in 2025, the chaotic, sugar-fueled roller coaster of the Halo Top story has finally pulled into the station. The era of hypergrowth, of 2,500% revenue spikes, and of black markets for birthday cake ice cream is long dead. But so is the era of the death spiral. The diversification strategies executed by Wells Enterprises, the export of anxiety to international markets, the snackification into bars, and the licensing into baking aisles have achieved their cold, calculated purpose. They have stopped the bleeding. The patient has been stabilized. Halo Top is no longer a unicorn or a rocket ship. It is something far more mundane and far more permanent. It is a staple. The financial picture of 2024 and 2025 tells the story of this boring victory. The revenue, which had crashed from its $350 million peak to below $100 million in the dark days of 2020, has slowly, methodically climbed back to an estimated $150 million. It is not a V-shaped recovery. It is a slow, grinding ascent built on distribution muscle rather than consumer passion. The brand has settled into a predictable rhythm. It grows at a modest 10% per year, driven not by viral articles in GQ, but by the quiet efficiency of being available in 40 countries. The global ice cream spin-off trends of the mid-2020s, where giant conglomerates like Unilever began restructuring their ice cream portfolios to shed risk, actually benefited Halo Top. In a market contracting around premium and indulgent treats due to inflation, Halo Top's value proposition, not in price but in calories per dollar, became a defensive asset. It remains the safe choice for the budget-conscious dieter. The effectiveness of the diversification is that it saved the brand from the frozen yogurt graveyard. Most diet fads, think of Snackwell's cookies or Slim Fast shakes, eventually disappear completely. Halo Top survived because it successfully shapeshifted. By 2025, The non-dairy and fruit bar lines account for nearly 30% of its sales, insulating it from the volatility of the dairy market. The international division, particularly in the UK and Australia, where the healthy indulgence trend hit 5 years later than in the US, now drives a significant portion of the volume, helping the brand reach the milestone of 500 million pints sold globally. The glocalization worked. By reducing calorie counts to meet European laws and introducing flavors like matcha mochi in Asia, they proved that body dysmorphia is a universal language. But this stability has come at the cost of relevance. If you walk into a grocery store in 2025, Halo Top is there, but it is invisible. It sits in the freezer case, a gold-rimmed soldier in a crowded army of better-for-you options. It is flanked by Nix, by Rebel, by Enlightened, and by the light versions of Ben & Jerry's. It is no longer special. It is no longer a hack. It is just low-calorie ice cream. The cultural heat has evaporated. No one is posting photos of their Halo Top haul on Instagram anymore because it is no longer a status symbol. It is a utility, like toothpaste or deodorant. It is something you buy because you need it, not because you love it. The internal drama has also been silenced. The founders, Wolverton and Boughton, are long gone, living out their days as wealthy investors in other startups. The hustle culture of the early days, the motels, the sleepless nights, the lawsuits, has been replaced by the hum of corporate bureaucracy. Decisions are no longer made by gut instinct in a kitchen. They are made by committees in Iowa, based on focus groups and Nielsen data. The soul of the brand, the chaotic, desperate energy of a lawyer trying to cure his own hypoglycemia, has been completely metabolized by the system. Halo Top is now a perfect corporate citizen, profitable, predictable, and profoundly boring. The journey from the idealistic rise to the stabilization is the ultimate arc of modern capitalism. The system took a wild, disruptive anomaly, stripped it of its danger, fixed its flaws, maximized its reach, and turned it into a reliable annuity. The diversification strategy worked perfectly. It didn't bring back the magic of 2016. Nothing could, but it ensured that the brand didn't die in 2019. It proved that in the food industry, you can survive the death of your hype if you are willing to become a commodity. Halo Top is dead. Long live Halo Top, the lie of guilt-free eating. As we stand in 2025, looking back at the meteoric, chaotic, and ultimately humbling 14-year arc of Halo Top Creamery, we are left with a set of business lessons that are less about ice cream and more about the dark, conflicted psychology of the modern consumer. The story of Justin Wolverton, the lawyer who hated his job and just wanted to eat a bowl of sugar without hating himself, is a perfect mirror for the neurosis of the 21st century. The first and most uncomfortable lesson this brand teaches us is that in the modern wellness economy, we do not buy products to be healthy. We buy products to be forgiven. For decades, the diet industry sold restriction. It sold the idea that you had to suffer to be thin. You ate celery, you drank water, you endured. But Halo Top discovered a far more profitable emotional vein, moral licensing. The genius of the 240 calories printed on the front of the pint wasn't a nutritional fact. It was a grant of immunity. It told the consumer, you can commit the sin of gluttony, you can eat the entire container, and you will face no punishment. This was the alchemy that turned a chalky, icy product into a billion-dollar brand. It proved that the most valuable commodity in the food industry isn't flavor, and it isn't nutrition, it is absolution. Ben & Jerry's sells joy. Halo Top sells relief. The lesson for any entrepreneur is that if you can solve a customer's guilt, They will forgive almost any flaw in your product. They will forgive the texture. They will forgive the price. They will forgive the chemical aftertaste, because the psychological relief of eating without consequence is sweeter than any sugar. The second lesson, carved into the tombstones of the 2018 crash, is about the lethality of hype. We live in an era that worships the viral moment. Every brand wants to break the internet the way Halo Top did with that GQ article in 2016. But Halo Top's trajectory proves that a viral explosion is not a business strategy. It is a traumatic event. The company grew 2,500% in a single year. To an outsider, that looks like success. To an operator, that is a catastrophe. It broke the supply chain, it destroyed quality control, and most dangerously, it created a false baseline. When you build a brand on a fad, on the treasure hunt excitement of a shortage, you are renting your customers, not owning them. When the shortage ended and the shelves were full, the excitement evaporated. The lesson here is that hypergrowth is a debt that must be paid. The speed of the ascent guarantees the violence of the fall. The brands that survive are not the ones that shoot up like rockets. They are the ones that build a foundation slowly enough to hold the weight of their own success. Halo Top tried to skip the building phase and go straight to the empire phase, and they paid for it with a 70% collapse in revenue. However, the most personal lesson comes from the founders themselves, Wolverton and Booton. Their journey deconstructs the myth of the visionary founder. We are taught to believe that great companies are built by men with 50-year plans and unshakable confidence. But Halo Top was built by two desperate lawyers who were making it up as they went along. They didn't have a vision. They had a problem and a hustle. They slept in motels. They maxed out credit cards. They almost went bankrupt a dozen times. Their success wasn't due to a master plan. It was due to resilience in the face of humiliation. They were willing to be the sweaty guys in the suits begging store managers for shelf space. They were willing to be mocked for their chalky ice cream until they fixed it. The lesson is that the glamour of entrepreneurship is a lie told in retrospect. The reality is a gritty, undignified war of attrition. And crucially, they learned the most important lesson of all: know when to leave. Selling the company to Wells Enterprises in 2019 was not a sellout. It was a survival instinct. They recognized that they were wartime generals who didn't know how to run a peacetime country. They handed the keys to the boring, efficient professionals at the exact right moment, saving their fortunes and the brand's future before the hype completely ran out. The final lesson of the Halo Top saga, the one that is etched into the corporate strategy of every food conglomerate in 2025, is that survival requires the death of the soul. Under the ownership of Wells Enterprises, Halo Top has achieved what Justin Wolverton could not permanence, but it achieved it by becoming a shapeshifter. In the idealistic rise, the brand stood for one thing: low-calorie, high-protein. It was a specific, uncompromising philosophy. Today, the brand stands for everything and nothing. It is keto, it is fruit, it is dairy-free, it is baking mix, it is yogurt. It is a platform for dietary anxiety, mirroring whatever trend is currently popular on social media. The lesson here is that to survive the death of a fad, a brand must be willing to abandon its own identity. It must stop being a leader that tells the customer what to eat and start being a follower that gives the customer whatever they are currently searching for on Google. Halo Top survived by becoming the generic brand for better for you, a hollow vessel that can be filled with any ingredient as long as the calorie count on the front is low. This transformation reveals the dark brilliance of the international diversification. The fact that Halo Top is now a stable, growing brand in the UK, Australia, and Canada, even as it languishes in the US, teaches us that neurosis is the world's most scalable export. The American obsession with thinness, the fear of sugar, and the desire for a hack to cheat biology are not unique to Los Angeles. They are universal. By exporting the Halo Top anxiety to new markets, Wells Enterprises prove that you can restart the hype cycle geographically. A fad that dies in New York can be reborn in London 5 years later. The brand's global footprint is a testament to the fact that while cultures may differ on flavors, they are remarkably united in their guilt over eating dessert. Ultimately, the tragedy of Halo Top is the tragedy of the modern food system itself. In 2016, for a brief shining moment, we believed in magic. We believed that a lawyer in his kitchen had invented a way to cheat the laws of thermodynamics. We believed we could have our cake and eat it too. We believed that healthy and indulgent could be the same thing. The crash of 2018 was the moment we woke up and realized that it was just a chemical trick. It was just air, erythritol, and marketing. But the fact that the brand still exists, the fact that it still sells $150 million worth of product a year proves that we don't care about the truth. We prefer the lie. We prefer the halo. Today, Halo Top sits in the freezer aisle, a quiet, profitable, gold-rimmed soldier in the army of big food. It is no longer the rebel, it is the establishment. It is the lean cuisine of the 2020s, a safe, boring staple for people trying to lose 5 pounds. The mosh pit of excitement is gone. The black market is gone. The hype is gone. Justin Wolverton and Doug Booten have moved on to new ventures, their millions secured. And the consumer? The consumer is still there, standing in the cold air of the freezer aisle at 10 p.m., holding a pint that weighs surprisingly little, reading the number 280 on the front, and buying it not because it will change their life, but because it will make them feel just a little bit less guilty about the night ahead. The revolution is over. The guilt-free ice cream didn't save us, but it did succeed in selling us back our own insecurity, one light, airy spoonful at a time.